PPP account. Okay. And the reason why we want to have a separate bank account for the PPP is it'll make tracking your expenses a whole lot easier. If you deposit the loan into this separate account and do not put any other funds in the account, and when you go at the end of the 8 weeks and pull off your bank statements, you know that the one deposit in there is the loan. It's going to match up with the loan. Okay. That 8-week period on that bank statement, which will make your record keeping and tracking a whole lot easier. Okay. So once you've got your loan in the PPP account, don't spend or transfer any money from this account unless it is for an approved payment, which we'll go into in a little bit. Okay, and then only transfer money out of this account in exact amounts with the documentation showing what it was for and what the expense was. Okay, at the end of the 8 weeks, when you go into the bank to apply for forgiveness, you know, it's kind of like doing taxes, in my opinion. If you come in with a shoebox full of receipts and messy paperwork, you're not going to make a lot of friends at the bank, and they're going to kind of put you off to the end. But if you come in with documentation for every single transaction, and it's nice and neat, and the banker can easily follow it, you're going to make a lot of friends at that bank, and they're going to want to help you out to make sure that your loan is forgivable as possible. Okay, so let's talk about some of these expenses. The main one and the main purpose of this program is payroll-related expenses. So long as you spend at least 75% of this loan on payroll, then you're well on your way to having this, most of this loan, if not all of it, become forgivable.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
This is Ryan. It seems like is your slide deck forwarding? It's not changing for anybody else or for a few people. Has it changed for everybody, or is it just a connection for some people?
The slide deck's changing for me. I'm on the payroll one. I can
okay. So everybody that's online, are you guys seeing the same one slide, or is it progressing for you?
Same one slide.
It's the same one slide, Chris.
Yes.
You may want to try resharing the screen again.
Okay.
Well, and I believe if you are going to use it like a normal slide deck, you have to open the slide deck like you're showing it and then share screen.
Got it. Okay.
I believe.
So let's try this. How's that? Is that better?
That's right. You got it.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're on the payroll. And what you want to do to make your life easier is to keep your original business checking account as your payroll account. That's where your direct deposits are going to come out of. That's where your payroll tax deposits are going to come out of. Don't switch all of that bank information over to your new PPP account. It'll just make your life a lot more complicated. What you're going to do instead is you're going to transfer the exact amount of each payroll from your PPP account to your payroll account or your general checking, wherever it normally comes out of. Okay, most payroll providers, software, whatever, will give you the exact amount of the gross wages that you need that'll come out of your account, and they'll also give you the amount of the payroll taxes that'll come out of your account. So transfer those over in the exact amounts, and then you'll have the payroll reports to back up those transfers. Okay. All right. Oh, whoops, one too far. Okay. The next expense has to do with employee benefits, which includes your health insurance and 401k. Here, just like with payroll, you're going to transfer over the exact amount of your health insurance and the exact amount of the company 401k. A question came in yesterday about union health insurance and union retirement plans. And as far as I know, that those are allowable expenses. So if your bank is telling you otherwise, I would ask them to relook into that issue. Because the intent of this loan is to provide businesses with the funds to cover payroll and payroll-related expenses. And health insurance and retirement expenses would qualify even if they're a union, in my humble opinion. Okay, and then the next group of expenses is rent, utilities, mortgage, interest. Okay, and once again, you're going to transfer the exact amounts from your PPP account to your general checking for these expenses. You can also pay these expenses directly from the PPP account if that's easier. Okay, so rent, let's talk about rent. Make sure you have a signed lease agreement, even if the lease is with a related party. For example, if you run your business out of your home or out of your shop, make sure you have a signed lease agreement between you personally and your business, and it needs to be dated before February 15th of 2020, okay? And then the lease payments that you're gonna pull out of your account are gonna match up with this lease document. Okay, this also applies to vehicles that you lease, equipment that you lease, anything that's on a rental agreement or a lease agreement would qualify. Just make sure you have the signed agreement in hand and that the payments that are coming out match that signed agreement. All right, the next item is utilities. Okay, utilities include your basics, your water, sewer, gas, electric, but it also includes cell phones. That would be for all staff, even those in the field, and internet, okay? There is a provision in there that one of the utilities is transportation costs. So if you have a fleet of vehicles, then the fuel for those vehicles would qualify as well. There's still some uncertainty as to whether or not that would include mileage reimbursement, but for now we're under the assumption that mileage reimbursement does not count, but gas would under the utilities. Okay, and then the next one is mortgage interest. And so my understanding on the mortgage interest is if you own your building or own your property, and there's not a separate lease agreement between the business and you personally, then the interest portion of those mortgage payments would be included. Okay, so if we take the rent, utilities, mortgage interest, this amount cannot exceed 25% of the loan in order for it to be forgivable. All right. So your next step for forgiveness is to print off your bank statements like I mentioned earlier, with all your documentation lined up right behind it. Every transaction on the bank statement should be supported with documentation and source documents. Get those lease agreements in place. The more information you can provide the bank to substantiate your position, the better off you're going to be. One key takeaway is to remember that 8 weeks does not equal 2 months. There's a big difference here. The 8-week clock starts the day you receive funding. I know a lot of people receive funding, at 10 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night. Well, under the way this is written, is that 8-week clock starts that day, no matter what time you receive your funds. Okay, and you may want to look as you get close to the end of the 8-week period about accelerating expenses or paying out bonuses, whether it's retention bonus or whatever, to make sure that you've got the money spent according to the SBA's guidance. Now, the IRS came out a couple weeks ago and said that while the amount forgiven on the loan is not considered income, the related expenses that were incurred for the amount that was forgiven are not going to be deductible. So what that basically means is whatever amount of the loan is forgiven will be income to you, okay, in a roundabout way. And this is the IRS's way of saying you're not going to double dip. You're not going to get a tax-free grant and then get to write off expenses against that. All right, so this is a quick run through about what to do when you've got your PPP loan. So now I'm going to open the panel to questions.
Quick question on the funding timing. I received the loan application paperwork and the note was signed on the 22nd of April and the funds were not deposited until the 23rd. Presume that by the contract, expenses incurred on the 22nd would be attributable to the PPP loan.
So your loan was funded on the 23rd, which means that the 8-week clock starts on the 23rd. Doesn't matter when the paperwork was signed.
Okay.
When it was funded. So your expenses on the 22nd, unfortunately, would not count since they were paid out a day before the loan funded.
Okay. All right.
Good question, though.
I have one question. What happens if you got your PPP loan and you didn't bring the guys back to work the first week, but you started bringing them back to work the second week? You still didn't get 7 weeks? Is that how it works?
I did not catch that question. The reception was really choppy. Can you try that again?
Okay. Can you hear me any better?
Yes, that's a lot better.
Okay. My question is, if I didn't bring them back to work the first week of my after the PPP loan, and I brought them back the second week, is it then that we just get forgiveness for the 7 weeks?
So it depends. You know, are you going to be able to spend the money by the end of the 8-week period? Item one. Item two, bringing back more employees than you had prior, or less employees than you had prior. There's two different calculations that go into to determine what percent of the loan is forgivable, and both of those will play a role. So if you can get the money spent in a manner such that it is likely just covered by the end of the 8 weeks, then that part's fine. But if you bring back people and you didn't bring back enough staff, then part of the loan will just turn into a loan and will not be forgivable. It turns into a calculation based on hours worked during the 8-week period and hours worked during a couple baseline periods prior. So it gets a little bit more complex, at least how the regulations are written now. So.
I know Garen had a question. Garen, did you want to ask that question?
Yeah, I had a question about the submittal application compared with what we're being asked to work with on the forgiveness portion timing. So when we submitted, we were asked to come up with our monthly salary amount and then times that by 2.5, which would be 10 weeks worth of payroll. And then when the actual guidance came out, we only get coverage for 2 months. Is that accurate, or does my memory try and figure out how I'm gonna spend that extra 2 weeks worth of I can do it, but is that how it worked out in the timing of this?
It is, and so the extra 2 weeks of the loan that you received is meant to pay for the rent, utilities, things of that nature, because that was, I don't believe that was taken into account on the application itself. So that's where you got that extra buffer of loan proceeds for.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So Chris, I know this came up in our last one of these we did with the remodelers, and I've seen it in our registrations as well. Can you explain what you need about owner draws, and they're not forgivable, but you can make them forgivable, and because you have to process it through payroll. Can you explain what you did last time?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of businesses compensate their owners in one of two ways: either run it through payroll or take a owner draw or distribution. So anything that runs through payroll will count towards the forgiveness. Anything that runs through an owner draw account will not count. So if you're running owner draws and at the end of the year you do one payroll to kind of reconcile it all, or do a 1099 just to get something on the books, my advice would be to just throw yourself on payroll during this 8-week period. And any draws you're running out, just run it through as wage. There is a cap. It's $15,385 is the most you can pay somebody. during this 8-week period, anything above that does not count towards the calculation, because that comes into a play of people making over $100,000. So if you are an owner taking out draws, you may want to look and evaluate that and change it into a payroll situation just to get that money counted for this.
Do you have any advice on how we should do the FTE calculation, whether we should do the percentage or just do the 0.5 for any part-time folks?
So that's a good question. There's not much guidance out there from the Treasury or the SBA on the FTE. You know, various agencies in the federal government use a 30-hour mark as an FTE, and other agencies use a 40-hour mark for an FTE. So for now, we're assuming that in the next couple of weeks, as we start reaching the end of this 8-week, or the an 8-week period from when it first started, that we're going to see some further guidance on this. So what I would advise is just to use whatever benefits you the most, whether that's 30 hours or 40 hours.
So Chris, I have a question. The SBA with the Treasury just released their application that's supposed to provide guidance. It sounds like they're still missing some guidance in there. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of guidance that is missing. And if this is any indication of how things have gone, you know, when this was approved by Congress on a Friday, passing the law, the first loan application came out the next Friday. So there was 1 week that the SBA had to put together this loan application, and it changed 3 or 4 times in that 1 week. And as this has gone on, rules and regulations and guidance has evolved, and it has continued and will continue to evolve until we reach the end of this cycle. So I would imagine at some point we're going to see in the next week or two either some pretty big changes to this program, or some concrete, here's how we're going to calculate things going forward.
Any other questions for Chris?
Hey Chris, this is Jocelyn. I just have a question on the requirements for the documentation when you go into the bank. If you didn't do separate bank accounts, or there's other situations, do you know what is all required to come in there? We're guessing that we've spent 100% of the loan on payroll. Would they suffice for just our payroll statements, or would they want all the banking information as well?
That's going to be a bank by bank decision. My advice is, if you're not using a separate bank account, that's perfectly fine. Just give the bank as much information as they can, whether it's the payroll reports should be fine. But like I said, if you've got payroll reports followed up with the amounts coming out of your bank account that match, that'll really help. It'll make the bank's job a lot easier, and you're more likely to get approved on a quicker scale when all your ducks are in a row.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Oh, this is Heather at B&B. So by the end of all of this, we won't quite be, if I'm figuring right, we won't be doing our quarterly reports yet. How will we be reporting to the bank the unemployment and L&I and things like that we'll be paying?
Good question. So there is some debate out there as to whether L&I is going to qualify, because it's not based on compensation, it's just based on hours worked. But as far as unemployment is concerned, where it's based on a percentage of wages, you're going to have wages for this 8-week period. You've already got the state rate for unemployment. So we can calculate what that expense is that was incurred during that time. And a lot of payroll providers just pull that out every pay period, and instead of just paying it in once a quarter. So that's just something you'll have to track kind of on the side to show what the state tax expense was during that 8-week period.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions for Chris while you have him?
Just one quick question on the follow up on that then. So you're saying that even though we did not write a check, so to speak, for a cost or an expense, that expense would be claimable or deductible or whatever you want to call it there. So you wouldn't actually write the check for unemployment insurance, pay the quarterlies like she was talking about. Yeah.
So that's a good question. And because the 8-week period falls between 2 quarterly reporting periods, that's the banks should have some guidance on that here.
He is going to have to be the one to call you back.
But I'm going to say go ahead and calculate what that expense is to show, because it is an expense that you incurred during that 8-week period. And you know, we may want to, as we get close to that into the 8-week period, we may want to look at just writing a check to the state just to show that the expense has been incurred and it's been paid during this period. But I expect we'll see some further guidance on that exact issue as well. So that's a good question.
Right. Yeah. Just kind of prepay your taxes there just to get them on the books. Got it.
Hey, this is Garen again. Sorry, quick question about that 8-week versus 2-month period. So I was funded on April 28th, which means 8 weeks from that is June 23rd. Would you recommend all of us that are in that same situation that we would process our second half of June payroll earlier than the 30th? In my terms, a week earlier on the 23rd, so that I disperse from the 15th through the 30th on the 23rd and get it out on the 8th week?
Well, maybe not necessarily run the whole payroll, but you may want to do a short payroll. So instead of the last, moving up the last 2 weeks into the
Now, seriously.
So no matter where
say that one more time.
I'm just taking the money that they gave me and splitting it up into 4 paychecks, 8 weeks periods, and just sending it out to my folks. So does it matter when I make that last payment?
Well, as long as the expense was incurred, if you're prepaying like July's payroll, for example, that probably won't work. And that's why I was thinking maybe you would need to do a short payroll,
right?
Because otherwise you're paying people, you're running into issues of paying people before they actually work. Numbers as you get close to the end of that 8-week period, you should have a good idea of what you have left to spend out of that money once you take into account all the rent and utilities and
right
and all that. So yeah, you may want to run a short payroll.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, thank you, Chris. Really appreciate it. For everybody that's on, I will be sending out a follow-up email with this recording, as well as it will have Chris's contact info, this slide deck. I will also be including the SBA application I referred to that just was released by the SBA and the Treasury. It has a lot of information on it about what you're going to need, but as Chris mentioned or pointed out, a lot of that's still changing, but it's the best direction we have to date. Having said that, I wanted to roll into see if there's any questions regarding the current order, the governor's order we're working under now. Any questions about complying with any of those things, anything that you've seen on the street that you have questions about, or any questions about phase 2, if you've seen that, or some questions just generally about that I can answer for you now. Well, this is going to be easy on my part. It was the Chris show today. I really appreciate that. You guys made it really easy on me. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I really appreciate everybody logging in today. We have these every Tuesday morning, same time. I believe next week, most likely we will be discussing phase 2. We should have some more information from the governor's office regarding that. I will also have more information from BIAW. They are providing a couple webinars of their own coming up. And the week after that, we will be hearing from Workforce Southwest. They are going to be talking about some kind of what they've seen on their side. I know our industry, we've always talked about this, at least the last few years, about having a lack of or a gap in the labor force, the trades that we need to fulfill, just to fill what we are currently looking at. It's not unique to our county. It's a nationwide issue, but there are a lot of people that we know are hard workers that have, they will get there every day. They are looking for possibly a change due to what's happening right now and their loss of income and their loss of jobs. So she's going to discuss those opportunities, how they can put you guys in touch with those people, as well as opportunities or actually some tools if any of your workers have been laid off and looking for something as well. So that will be 2 weeks from today as well. And with that, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it and appreciate having you guys on today. And thank you again, Chris. I appreciate you helping us out with these. I think these are a lot of questions that I could not answer, but definitely you can. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Chris.
Have a great day, everyone.